Welcome back to another edition of the Knight Report podcast. I'm your host, Mike Broadbent. Joining me for this edition of the pod is Rutgers beat reporter Craig Epstein and also Rutgers beat reporter Alec Crouthamel. Guys, Rutgers got its season opener in the victory column last night against the Howard Bison. They won 44-7 in a pretty... I'd say that it was a sluggish start, but by the end of the game, Rutgers started to hit their stride. I think the main takeaways from the game were, wow, that's a lot of injuries. Ethan had a pretty good first game, and a bunch of the players that we thought were going to be good ended up being good. But first, this podcast is presented to you by Knight and Day Apparel. Get ready for football and tailgating season with Knight and Day Apparel. Our apparel is designed to keep you comfortable and stylish from the pregame excitement to the final whistle. Whether you're grilling in the parking lot or cheering on from the stands, our high-quality gear has you covered with unbeatable comfort and team spirit. Use our promo code Rutgers Rivals, and you get 10% off your purchase. Score big this season and keep shopping with Knight and Day Apparel. So, Alec, I know you were at the game. When the pregame injury report came out, I think we all kind of took a collective sigh because we all knew this was probably coming. But let's just go through the injuries and just vibe-wise talk about how we feel moving forward. Obviously, Motore out for the season. The other players that were listed as out for last night: AJ Serace, backup quarterback; Flip Dixon, starting safety; Al-Shadi Salam, backup corner; Ed Guerriere, backup running back; Wesley Bailey, starting defensive end; DK Gilly, backup defensive back; Sam Piloff, backup linebacker; Troy Rainey, rotational defensive lineman; and Amir Stinnett, backup offensive guard. Guys who were listed as questionable: Eric Rogers, obviously ended up playing. He had one of the biggest plays of the game. Christian Dremel, Jesse O'Fury, Sean Benjamin, Tyreen Powell, Timmy Ward, Keontae Hamilton, Tyler Needham, Reggie Sutton, Aaron Lewis, Dante Chen, Dino Kaliak-Manis. So a lot of those guys ended up playing, but I think this kind of just goes to show John might not have been lying when he was talking about how banged up these players were. But I know a bunch of questions were asked about it. Are you concerned about the injuries moving forward in at least the start of the season?
I mean, the guys that played, I wouldn't say that I was overly concerned. Obviously, you talked about Eric Rogers, the pick six that he had. He looked just fine moving around. Aaron Lewis, looked like his usual self, getting to the quarterback, had a few pressures here and there. Christian Dremel being questionable was pretty surprising as well, but he looked okay. He didn't get as much run in the receiver room. It was mostly Chris Long, Ian Strong, and Demir Miller, but he was out there returning punts, so it seems like he's going to be okay as well. The guys who are out, Flip Dixon, when asked about in the postgame, Schiano said he didn't think there were two long-term injuries about Dixon and also Wesley Bailey and guys like that were out. He didn't think they were long-term injuries. He didn't say any were season-ending either. The more he kind of talked about it, the more it seemed like it was just we'll manage it week to week, and we think they'll be back soon. So I'm not overly concerned. Obviously, you don't want to see any of your starters out, but I think a lot of the young guys did play well. I'm sure we'll talk about Kaj Sanders and his efforts today, how well he played in place of Flip Dixon, but I'm not overly concerned about a lot of the starter injuries that we're seeing early on. I know you and Richie have talked about it a lot. It seems like it's one of those things where it's just manage the best you can and get to Virginia Tech.
Yeah, even going back, as we've seen the last kind of few press conferences with Schiano, he was kind of hinting at it, the fact that, there was going to be several guys banged up. Now, did I expect to look at the availability report and see a MASH unit? No, I didn't expect that. But, you kind of figured, he said especially on the offensive line front that a couple of guys were banged up. So, I think as we all kind of expected, these first two games, you kind of look at them as maybe hopefully pseudo bye weeks, especially the Howard game. You expect that one to be easy, and it was pretty easy. And you want to get in, go play Akron, go beat Akron with, probably, I'm thinking several of those guys probably aren't going to play in game two. I guess we'll have to wait and see. But get those first two wins, put them in the bank, and then hopefully, get that bye week, get guys rested, get them healed up, and really get ready for that stretch from really week 3 on, because that's when you start, Big Ten play. Virginia Tech first. That game's going to be huge. And then you really start the thick of Big Ten play, and that's where you're going to need the guy like the Tyreen Powells and the Flip Dixons and guys like that But I think the young guys did a pretty good job yesterday, especially as, like you said, Alec will probably talk about that Koch Sanders play where he basically came in, like the Flash, coming in, setting that key block for Eric Rogers to get that pick six and really get Rutgers rolling.
Yeah, no, I think the guys who ended up not playing are actually banged up. But I think if it was a situation where, say, we were opening the season with Virginia Tech on the road, I don't think those guys would have necessarily sat out. I think this was mainly just it's not worth exasperating any issues they might already have. So might as well just sit them, get them healthy. We have 3 weeks until our first big test. Let's make sure that they're ready for that big test. Let's not, turn what could be a 1 to 2 week injury into a season-long injury because you forced an issue that didn't need to be forced. We talked about some of the young players. Let's talk about some of the guys who really stood out. You guys both mentioned Koch Sanders. He was a surprise start due to the aforementioned Flip Dixon injury. I thought he looked every bit like a seasoned veteran out there. From the obvious play where he was, running, playing, being a bouncer for for Eric Rogers, running down the sideline. He made quite a few open field tackles. He had a big third down tackle on the quarterback when he was rushing. He was flying all over the place, man. He might be one of the fastest guys on the team as well. Daryl Jabome, man, talk about, we talked about this in the preseason stuff. He needed to step up. In the absence of Motore being out for the season, he looked phenomenal last night. I could not believe how good he looked. I know the staff behind the scenes was incredibly high on him. They view him as like the next superstar linebacker coming through Rutgers. But to see him break out for a guy who hasn't played much organized football is a huge sign. Who were some of the other young players that really stood out to you, Craig? I'll let you talk about that first.
Honestly, though, I was just going to go back and say, yeah, I mean, like we've talked about in the past with the offseason where we're not allowed to, say what we see in scrimmages and practices. But I think you guys are smart enough to see kind of, Schiano will leave kind of those breadcrumbs where he'll mention guys who are impressing him. And it's no surprise that he mentioned several times throughout the offseason, Jabome, Koch Sanders, Ben Black, young guys like that who, even though we can't say what we see, Schiano talks about how they impressed them, and then you go out and you watch them in game. Watch them week one, and lo and behold, those are three guys right there who had good games. And I think Dymere Miller was another one who really, I mean, comes in with high hopes. And even though I think we'll probably talk about it a little bit more, the receiving core left a little bit to be desired. There were some drops here and there that probably should have been catches, but I thought Miller had a good game. That's just, this was a game like with the amount of injuries they had. This was a game where a lot of young guys were going to be asked to step up, and I think several of them did. And I think they talked about it during the broadcast. Koch Sanders is like the first true freshman to start for Rutgers since I don't even remember the exact year, but it's been that long. And like we talked about, he really earned his spot.
How about you, Alec? Who were a couple of the younger players that really stood out to you last night?
I think Craig put it really well with the players that he saw. Not really a young guy, but he's a guy. Here's a guy that was really looking to get back to his prior form. Sam Brown came in. He spelled Monangai a couple times on third downs, but then once Monangai got pulled after his touchdown, he really set the tone through the rushing attack as well. Obviously, he had that big touchdown as well where he kind of leaked out in the flat. Alec Manis saw him and found him, and he just ran home free with nobody covering him. I mean, Jabome once again played really well. He was absolutely all over the field. Sanders also had a really big pass breakup in the end zone. He kind of was behind on a corner route in the end zone, but he punched it out and broke it up and kept the score off the board. I believe that led to a turnover on downs for Howard. I mean, just looking at the stat sheet, Antoine Raymond, I'm sure him coming in, his first game, he's supposed to be a high school senior right now. I mean, he's coming in and absolutely setting the tone offensively. Even on that last play, which we can talk about that in a little bit, the reaction to that. Even on that last play, I was on the field, so I didn't see the play when it was actually happening. I was ready to publish my story with the final score of 38-7, and then I had to change it last second. But that's whatever. He even on the replay I saw, he even broke a tackle or two and getting to the end zone. That wasn't just a completely home free run like Sam Brown's was. So I mean, just a really banner day for a lot of these young guys. Looking at some of the other defensive players, Another veteran, Desmond Igbeneusen, had a pretty good game as well. Moses Walker, I think, played well, had a TFL. Just a really solid game all around. I thought Bo Mascow, who was competing with Al-Shadi Salam for that third cornerback spot, I thought he had a solid game too, picked up a couple of nice tackles in only his second collegiate game. So I thought a lot of the young guys played big parts in this win.
Yeah, and I think Antoine Raymond might have a ton of fans after what he ended up doing for Rutgers.
Are you one of them, Mike?
Rutgers cover. So I didn't actually watch the game because I don't know. Early on in the season, sometimes I feel really strongly, sometimes I don't. Given the injuries and given, I thought that they just might play some vanilla, base formations on offense. Antoine Raymond made Rutgers cover last night, so I'm sure that he's got a huge subsection of the fan base that is already a huge fan of Antoine Raymond. But the passing game, I thought the passing game, if you just look at the numbers, you're not going to be like, oh, this is clearly an upgrade. Ethan Kaliakmanis was 15 for 24, which is a 63% completion percentage, 147 yards passing, and 3 touchdowns, no turnovers. In terms of Ethan, the numbers aren't gaudy, but when you look a little deeper and actually watch the film, he had 2 drops, which we already kind of talked about. I think the thing, and Shiano commented about this at the end of the game. He said somebody asked how they thought Ethan did, and Greg said he thought he played a good game. He was clearly getting through his progressions. He wasn't deciding pre-snap, I'm just going to go to this guy because I trust him. He said no, he was actually scanning the field. He was, letting guys get open. He was doing improvisational plays, which is something that you didn't really see last year. Like, if you look at Ethan's rushing numbers, he had 6 rushes for 43 yards. Those were all on RPOs where he kept it, or when a play broke down and he saw a running lane, he would take it. He was just, Ethan, I think the nice thing about how he plays quarterback is that he just takes what the defense gives him, whether that is, the 3-yard out route because nothing else is there, whether it's the release valve to the running back, whether it's, scrambling around, making something out of nothing, or whether it's, throwing the ball out of the, back of the end zone because there's nothing there. I just thought he played a really clean game. I thought this is something you could build on. And while it's not super impressive like the numbers would, say or not say, I thought he had a really good first game as a Scarlet Knights quarterback. And I think this is something that he's, now that he's played in front of, the Rutgers fans, now that he's played with these teammates in the first real test, even though it wasn't a great opponent, I think this is something that he can only let his confidence kind of blossom further from. Is there anything else that Ethan did that really impressed you, Alec?
Well, it's 2 things that that really stood out to me. One, it was he actually threw to the tight end. Now, all those pass attempts,
a couple too.
Yeah, all those pass attempts to the tight ends didn't really go very far in the air before it was caught. It was mostly on those play action rollouts where the tight end leaks out of the blocking formation. He finds him and he's got some open space in front of him. But it's better than it was throughout the year last year, where according to Brian Fonseca, only 18 completed passes to tight ends.
Wow.
So being able to get 4 by Kenny Fletcher and 1 by Victor Kanopka on that same design play was definitely a big boost. And also his targeting over the middle. They threw over the middle an absurd amount of times, at least compared to years past. And it looked really good too. There were a couple passes where, maybe puts it a little bit too high or a little bit too much velocity, but it was largely accurate. I don't remember off the top of my head, but he had a very good completion rate in the intermediate over the middle type stuff. So, I was just really impressed with how he was able to navigate the middle of the field. And that's something that we haven't really seen, and I'm sure a lot of fans have been looking for. It was much different of a passing attack than last year, where it felt like it was either the receiver's getting it wide open or it's going to the sideline and no one's getting it if it's not on the money. So just seeing that, it's like the field opened up a little bit more in the passing game, more than just throwing to the sidelines or throwing to a wide open receiver in the flat. So that was a nice change of pace. Overall, I thought he managed it very well. Larry Scott, the Howard head coach, said he doesn't wow you, but he was a good game manager. And honestly, that's kind of exactly what Rutgers needs. And I feel like we've hinted at this for a while now. The drop-off between Gavin running the ball and Ethan running the ball isn't too big. Gavin's a better designed runner, but he didn't really scramble all that much, despite how good of a runner he is and how much of a powerful runner he is at the quarterback position. Now, when Rutgers was up by 30, and I'm sure many other people were holding their breath a little bit when he would get some of those carries, but he got back up every time. And I thought he just managed the game really well, exactly as you would like for a quarterback.
Yeah, and I think we talked about it just feels like for so long, and Matt Millen basically talked about it throughout the entire broadcast, was just like Rutgers, there were just passes yesterday that just looked very easy, very simple, and it's plays that Rutgers wasn't making last year. Like at the end of the day, they basically just make the easy plays look easy. That's your starting point, because if you can get those simple, 5-yard, those little passes that can open things up, and then you can start working the middle of the field more, and eventually maybe take a shot or whatever it may be. It's just it like you said, Ethan doesn't real like his. You look at his stats, and they don't jump off the page. They don't wow you, but you just watch it, and you can see the difference between Ethan and Gavin. It's just Ethan, and Ethan is just just better decision, is a quicker decision maker. He knows where seemingly where to go with the ball, and you saw with the play, the perfect example was the Sam Brown play where basically he has a guy coming up on him, and what does he do? He finds Sam Brown for it was 3rd and 25. He finds the busted coverage, throws that to him, and that's the ball game. Like that's a play last year that just doesn't feel like Rutgers makes, but this year he makes it, and that's the ball game.
Yeah, and we're talking about the tight ends. The two of the top rated players according to PFF from last night's game, two of the top 3, I should say, were Kenny Fletcher. He had a 90.7 grade last night on 48 snaps. Victor Knopka came in at second with an 88.0 grade. The two tight ends only combined for 5 catches, but 4 of those catches were for first downs. So they were clearly just like guys who leaked out and got open, and he found them. Of his 15 passes last night, 10 of them went for first downs. 2 more would have went for first downs had they not been dropped. Just overall, clean sheet type game. Really promising stuff, even though it's not gaudy numbers. Another big offensive thing was I thought the running backs combined looked outstanding, especially Kyle Monangai. 19 carries, 165 yards and a tutty. Sam Brown, 14 carries for 68 yards and no touchdowns on the ground, but he did have one through the air. He had that 34-yard catch for a touchdown. Kyle Monangai, I think I'm going to have to eat crow on one of my preseason predictions. I said he was going to go under 1,000 yards. Honestly, I'm ready to take that L right now. As long as he stays healthy, I think he's going to have closer to 2,000 yards rushing than 1,000 yards at this point, because I don't think they're going to take the foot off the gas with him. I think they want to have a really big year for Kyle Monangai. They're going to feed him. I could see him getting 15 plus carries every game, regardless of the scenario. And I could see him, getting every single offensive touch in a fourth quarter this year, like we've seen in the past, last year, even in 22, I think it was 22 against Michigan State. We went to East Lansing, and even though we lost, it was like, you look at the box score afterwards, and he just had like 180 yards rushing, and it was just like, holy crap, I didn't even, he just kept getting those chunk yards. Like every time he touched the ball, he gets 7 yards. And last night that felt like, he averaged 8.7 yards a carry. He had a long of 39. So that just shows he's churning every single time. You might have no gain here or there, but he was following it up with a 12-yard run. Kyle Monangai was just incredibly impressive, but nobody should really be surprised at that last night. They tried to work him into the passing game more than they had previously. He had that one catch where the linebacker, I think it was a linebacker or a safety for Howard, was able to stop him, and he ended up getting hurt. I don't know if he had a stinger or something like that, but wouldn't surprise me if you see a lot more involvement with the running backs in the passing game moving forward. Anything Kyle Monangai did that either of you guys were thought was notable other than everything?
Yeah, well, I think one of the underrated plays of the game was the fact that with 40 seconds to go before the half, Rutgers is basically, I was going to say that I think essentially if he didn't get a big run there, they probably would have taken that into the half. But the fact that he broke off and went as far as he did, and tack on the unnecessary roughness penalty there, that from that point on, that was Rutgers. That felt like the turning point where we talked about Rutgers. They're kind of sluggish to come out, which sometimes you kind of expect, getting your feet wet. But from that point on, that was pretty much the turning point in the game. And I think one of the great things about Kyle Monangai is the fact that with a running back like him, like it's almost like impossible to make them a one-dimensional offense, because even if you shut down the offense, they know like most of the plays are probably going to be handoffs to Monangai, and the guy just still goes off. I mean, it's just his vision, his balance. I mean, we've talked about it over and over again, but it's just truly incredible to watch.
Yeah, I think that handoff to end the half, I think that was the turning point too, because Howard had just scored. I believe their running back did some kind of like chop motion
Yep.
to the stands when he scored. I'm sure, and then on the ensuing kickoff, they started to get into it like a little bit. Whether it was like the fair catch, whether he'd actually signaled for a fair catch or what, they started to get into it a little bit, and then Monangai breaks off that big run, gets hit late out of bounds, talks his stuff, gets the extra 15, and yeah, I think they would have, if not for that run, just needed out. I thought Howard got an okay interior push, especially on that fourth down that they went for. I thought Howard got a great jump. That I forget who the linebacker was that got the jump off the line of scrimmage. He got a great jump and brought him down. But I mean, like Craig said, he just kept trucking along, and he's able to spring off these big runs, not because of he can physically overpower players. It's just his effort and the way he just keeps his head down and keeps his legs moving every single play, and his patience too. The way he's able to just stutter step and cut. I mean, it's great, especially at his size, where he can kind of like not, seem a little small. He is on the smaller side, but it's not like he is like hiding under a cut. He just makes his move, makes his cut, and goes. He's got great balance. That's probably his best attribute. As good as he is as a running back, I think his balance is his best attribute, and it sets up everything else the way he's able to physically dominate as a running back.
And they put up a graphic yesterday at one point for his stats last year, and it was like rushing yards first in Big Ten, rushing yards first, broken tackles first. Right? I mean, it was almost like an Aaron Judge type of stat sheet where it was just first. It's just like, wow, he's just incredible to watch.
Yeah, and he also hit 2,000 career rushing yards last night I think in the first half, because he had over 100 yards at halftime, which, I mean, like you guys were saying, that rush he had to end, not the end, but in that like minute before the half, he did have an incredible run on, because they had a hold the play before as well, and he picked up like 20 yards on that run prior that was called back. So he did that on back-to-back plays when they had to have known that it was coming. Like, they had to have known that he's getting the ball, and he was still able to do that. In terms of the defensive side of the ball, we haven't really talked a ton about that. Obviously, Eric Rogers makes the huge play for the pick six after Rutgers has a stalled offensive drive. I thought it was kind of a bend but don't break type performance all night. Howard did a really good job at converting a lot of really tough third downs. Scroggins was able to just like jitterbug, for 12 yards here or there to pick up, I think 3 or 4 first downs on the ground. They made some really crazy circus catches at points to pick up long first downs. I was impressed with Howard, honestly. I didn't think I was going to walk away saying like they probably have 3 or 4 guys that could probably play almost anywhere. Given that I should know that because they have, I think, the offensive preseason player of the year in their conference. They have, that linebacker that everybody was hyping up. They have 2 running backs who are really high level players. But overall, I thought the defense was clearly missing some of their top players, and it showed. I don't think they got a ton of pressure with 4. I don't think they got a ton of pressure, period. I think they had 1 sack, and that was Jordan Walker. They were able to stop the running game a decent amount, but there were far too many times where I feel like, the Howard guy was just, getting 10 to 15 yards on big chunk plays. Chiano continues to struggle with mobile quarterbacks. That's been kind of one of his weak points. Scroggins ended up with 67 yards rushing, 75 if you don't include a sack. Overall, I think there's a lot to learn from this game defensively, but there were some really impressive flashes. We talked about Kaj Sanders. We talked about Daryl Jabome. I thought there's a lot of promise, but there's a lot to clean up. And if you got to hope the guys who were not playing last night become full strength by the time Virginia Tech rolls around. What are some other defensive notes that you guys have from watching last night's game? Alec, I'll let you have this one first.
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit it right there. It was a promising performance, but they still struggled to contain, especially with Scroggins at quarterback. Like you mentioned, he was just able to kind of get out of the pocket and just run forward for 10, 15 yards. Like you mentioned, they did have that one crazy third down conversion. It was a leaping catch. Edgerrin James' son actually scored the only touchdown for Howard, if that starts to age you a little bit, the NFL Hall of Famer for the Colts. But yeah, they had two really good running backs. Shiano mentioned multiple times post game last night about they knew what they were up against with the high level players that they had, that Howard has in their backfield at running back and at quarterback, in terms of just being able to get into space and really make things happen. But I mean, like you said, it was just a bend but don't break performance. I was impressed with how they kind of clamped up when it got into the red zone. Things just kind of shrunk a little bit. That's kind of how it goes in the red zone. Things kind of shrink. You can't really open up space as much. A nice game for Jaquan Loyal, who had 1.5 tackles for loss. I thought he played really well. The rotation of him, Kaj Sanders, and Desmond Igbeneusen, I think, played really well in the back end of the secondary. Obviously missing Flip Dixon as well. I'm curious to see when Flip does come back, how does Kaj rotate in? Because he showed in that first game, well, once again, not the highest caliber of opponent. I mean, he can play out there as a true freshman. So once Flip does come back, I'm curious to see how that rotation works, because they kind of already had that three-man rotation at safety between Igbeneusen, Loyal, and Dixon. And I thought the three of them with Sanders in there instead of Flip, I thought they played really well. The secondary was pretty good. You didn't hear a lot of Robert Longerbeam's name, but I thought that was a good thing because they weren't really throwing to him at all. I mean, I don't know if I remember him making a big play because they just completely avoided him. It felt like throughout the game. So I thought the secondary had a really good game, getting some of those younger guys in late as well. Some of those guys that Shiano has been talking about all summer was very good to see. I said this before. I thought Bo Masco had a pretty solid game at cornerback as well. So definitely things to work on, containing the rushing attack and getting pressure on the quarterback. I thought the defensive line could have played a little bit better, but they got the job done. And, I mean, they only allowed 7 points and allowed less than 300 yards. So I think against any opponent, that should be considered a success.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's funny to, we're truly nitpicking, giving up 7 points, but it is true. I think a lot of it, for the most part, it was a bend but don't break kind of performance, which I think a lot of that is attributed to just the injuries that they were dealing with. But as we talked about, as you said, Mike, Howard, in terms of bye games, Howard isn't, Howard might not be, the best team in the world, but they're not Wagner. I mean, they have some players here, and they're pretty good offensively. So the fact that Rutgers was able to just hold them to just that one score, I think is a feather in their cap. And I think, like you said, it's something to work on. But I think once they start getting more and more guys back, I think this defense will look a lot different, and I think they will start to develop more of a pass rush. And I think, like you talked about, I think their secondary looked pretty good yesterday. I think Longerbeam, I think like you said, it's usually a good thing we don't have to hear the corner's name, because that means they ain't throwing his way. And Eric Rogers had the key pick 6 to get things going. So, it's not a performance that's going to have you jumping for joy, but I thought, it was what they needed.
And I will say, this is another thing that Shiano mentioned post-game. There's many different levels to FCS, and I think people got a little bit spoiled with playing Wagner 2 years in a row, where you can't just sleepwalk to 50 points. Howard's a good FCS team, and Wagner one of the weaker in the FCS ranks even. So I thought it's not an easy opponent. While it is an FCS opponent, like Shiano mentioned, there's multiple levels to FCS, and I thought they handled their business, and now it's on to Akron.
Yeah, I mean, back-to-back MEAC champions, and the fact that I think it's also a good thing to the fact that you get a little bit of at least a little bit of a competition here, because I just feel like facing a Wagner and beating them like 66-0, like you're almost better off just scrimmaging. Like it's just like, no offense to Wagner, but it's just you don't really learn anything about your team. And it just comes like we watch the games. It's just men amongst boys out there. But you face a Wagner you face a Howard who actually has a couple of decent players, and even though you might not appreciate it in the moment, I think you learn more about your team. When they face at least a little bit of that adversity. And Rutgers face a little bit of adversity after that sluggish start, but they answered the call, and really I'd say from 40 seconds in the second quarter on, it was Rutgers' game.
Yeah, no, I feel like it was closer than the score would indicate in the first half. Second half, the floodgates certainly opened. So, like you said, it's on to Akron next week. Rutgers will be playing Akron on Saturday at noon. Also at SHI Stadium, they had a couple extra days of rest on Akron, who will be coming off of what is likely to be a pretty sizable beatdown against Ohio State. They play them tomorrow. So we'll have all the coverage on that upcoming game. Is there any other anecdotes or takeaways that you guys wanted to discuss from yesterday's game before we finally do our Night and Day giveaway? I know we were supposed to do that earlier this week, but with all the recording, that kind of got lost in the shuffle. So we're going to do that right after we're done with coverage here. But any anecdotes, last thoughts on the Howard game, boys?
Well, one thing that I wanted to hear your guys' thoughts on was the end, where Antoine Raymond and Johnny Shepard and the second team comes in. They keep running the ball. Howard uses the timeouts to try to score on the run. Then Greg decides to he said it wasn't retaliatory, but I feel like at least a little bit it felt like he was, if you want to play this game of keep playing till the final whistle, you're going to get the final game. You're going to get the game until the final whistle instead of taking the kneel down. I mean, it looked like they exchanged a bit of a discussion as well in the post-game handshake. I don't know. I didn't see it as too out of line, but it's one of those things. It's always going to come up in some of these dominant games where it's like, how much is too much?
Yeah, and especially when you start playing like the younger guy, like you put in the freshman like Antoine Raymond, and you put in a Johnny Shepard who might not get that much playing time this year. And those guys, those guys are going to want to, get some stats, start stat padding a little bit here, because it's just, this might be one of the few times you get to play this year. And I think, like you said, once like Howard had the ball, and they could have basically waved the white flag, but they didn't want to, which I respect that. The fact that the coach seems like a competitive guy and wants to play until the final whistle. Like, that's fine if you want to use your timeouts and keep the game going. But at the same time, Rutgers, that last run by Raymond that we talked about, he broke 6 tackles. So I mean, at the same time, as much as you want to kill Rutgers for running up the score there, your guys could have tackled him, but they didn't. And so sorry. Sometimes these things happen. And I appreciate the competitive spirit from the Howard coach, but at the same time, it's like, Rutgers is going to use these games as Shiano talked about in the post-game press conference. He's going to use these moments to give guys more and more reps so that, if they ever need them, which when you watch football and how injuries happen, as we've already seen how quickly injuries can happen, these guys could be relied upon later in the season. So you just want to get them in a rhythm, give them some reps, and see what happens.
Yeah, I don't think Shiano would ever admit to being retaliatory, but it was a kind of like, what the hell are you doing? Like, we're trying to run out the clock. We are actively just trying to end this game, get everyone off the field. You're calling timeouts. It's like, okay, you're going to call timeouts. You're going to, you're going to fuck around. You're going to find out. So I'm glad that they scored the extra touchdown.
I knew the Philly guy was going to bring out that line.
I mean, I'm glad that we got to see Antoine Raymond. I mean, he runs similar to Pacheco, where it just seems like he's angry at the ground as he's running. I don't know who made that comment first, but I saw that somewhere. So credit to whoever made that comment. But yeah, I mean, don't play stupid games. You don't want to win stupid prizes. Like, if we're trying to just like gracefully end a game, don't try and prolong it so you can get an extra, participation award touchdown at the end of the game if you're Howard.
And they were, let's be honest, they were asking for it a little bit with the chop in the end zone and, the late hit on Monangai. There's chippiness there. So, what comes around goes around.
Yep, they were kind of asking for it in a lot of ways. So it is what it is. I'm glad we got out relatively injury-free from what I can tell. Nobody seems to have had any injuries that, would take them off the field. So I don't think the injury report next week will look much different than it did this week. And that's all you can kind of ask for. You get a clean win, both from play perspective and a clean win from a health perspective. And that's what we got last night. We covered on top of that. All around beautiful game.
Good with teams win. Great teams cover.
You got it, Craig.
Exactly. I used to say that ironically during the Chris Ash era, but I'm glad we're on the other side of it now.
Yeah, Rutgers has had a pretty if you look against the spread over the years, they have done a pretty good job since Shiano got back. There was a guy who it was famous because there was just literally a guy who would bring a duffel bag of cash to Vegas, and I think it was Ash's last year, and just bet against Rutgers every week against the spread, and they literally couldn't make the spread high enough to actually make Rutgers cover the spread.
And they said, Urban, stop coming here with your bags of cash. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh my God. All right, let's do this giveaway. Anybody who's participated has been entered in to win the Knight and Day giveaway. We have 3 prizes we're going to give out to 3 different people. As you can see on the right, if you entered with an Apple Podcast review, you get 2 entries, and if you didn't, you just get 1. So we're going to run this 3 separate times for our 3 winners. If we pick your name, please contact Richie at rurichie@gmail.com, and you can claim your prize.
I see 2 Alex there. Is Alec? Did you put your name in there twice?
Oh, that's not me. That's that guy. I think I actually know who that is, but it's not me. I promise.
All right, the first winner is Tech Reef on Apple Podcasts. So if your handle was Tech Reef and you submitted a review on Apple Podcasts, congrats, you are a winner. Please contact Richie and claim your prize. I'm going to remove all of yours, and we're going to run this a second time. Prize. That's rurichie@gmail.com. Once again, let's find out who our 3rd winner is.
It's like Wheel of Fortune. Hope you don't go bankrupt.
Yeah.
No whammies, no whammies, no whammies, no whammies. Stop!
Final winner contest is NJ_732 from YouTube. If that is your handle, like I said before, please contact Richie to claim your prize. I want to thank everybody who participated in our Knight and Day giveaway. Richie has probably the coolest giveaway that we've done yet planned for right before the basketball season. That's when we'll do our next giveaway, so maybe that'll give you a hint as to what we're planning on giving away. But I don't want to say anything more to spoil that, but I think it's going to be one of the most sought-after things we've ever done. So
maybe I'll answer my name in that one.
Yeah, I think I might too. It's that cool prize.
Basketball lessons with Richie O'Leary.
Oh my God. Yeah. I want to thank everybody for listening, everybody who's rated, reviewed, participated in our giveaway. It has helped us get a ton more reviews on our podcast. It has helped grow the channel significantly. So we really do appreciate each and every one of you. We don't take any of you for granted. We're going to have all this coverage and more next week. We're going to have a pregame show or we're going to have a pregame pod previewing Akron. We're going to have a postgame pod after the game. Anything else that pops up in the meantime as well, we will have you covered there. If you want to get in on the scoop before we get a podcast up, which is rare, you can obviously sign up for the boards, get all the information, have the pulse of Rutgers sports right into your veins with the message board on RutgersRivals.com. But for me, for Craig, and for Alec, we appreciate you joining us for another edition of the Knight Report podcast. Signing off.